The National Air and Space Museum has the premier aviation and spaceflight collection, but I would argue it's one of the great museum collections of any kind in the world. There are about 365 airplanes in the collection. More than a third of those are one of a kind or the sole survivor. You can see them nowhere else other than at the National Air and Space Museum. The National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. opened in 1976, but almost immediately we realized we needed more space. We had 1 million visitors in the first 28 days after we opened. So just a few years after that, we began planning for what we called the extension in those days. And in 2003, on the 100th anniversary of the Wright brothers' first flights, we opened this facility to the public. In 2011, we added our restoration hangar and conservation lab to allow us to do the restoration and conservation work here on site at the museum. When we get the artifacts, they're in all kinds of conditions. Some of them are in perfect shape and ready to go on display. Others are in a state of disrepair or incomplete and need a lot of work. So we do everything from restoring the airplanes and other artifacts to conservation and preservation work, where we have something that we preserve as much of the original material as possible. That's always our goal, no matter what we do with an artifact, is we want to keep it as completely original as possible. For example, we have a World War I airplane, a 1916 airplane, which still has its original fabric covering on it. It's one of the few airplanes in the world from that time that still has its original fabric, so it's almost completely original from 1916. I've been a curator here for 35 years, and one of the most special objects that I personally collected is a Bell UH-1 Huey helicopter, the famous Huey helicopter from the Vietnam War era. And what makes it so special is we were able to find people who actually flew that very helicopter, worked on that very helicopter, and they told us things about that object that we couldn't have known in any other way. And that's what the museum does. I like to say it's the place where the hardware and the humanity intersect, because even though these are amazing objects, they really are about people. One of the most amazing objects we have in the collection is the Space Shuttle Discovery. The shuttle program ended in 2012, and we were able to acquire one of the remaining shuttles. And it was a very special day in the Smithsonian's history, really in Washington's history, because the shuttle was flown here on board its 747 shuttle carrier aircraft, and everybody was out. They were on the rooftops of the office buildings to capture this moment when the shuttle flew over Washington, D.C., landed here at the Air and Space Museum, and we were able to put it on display. One of the things that human exploration in aviation and spaceflight has done, of course, has inspired us. It's one of the great human achievements that we can point to. And one of the missions of the Air and Space Museum is to be that inspirational focus for everyone, particularly young people. We have many young people who come here and they may see something in the museum that touches them, inspires them, causes them to think, hey, I can do that too. Maybe I can do something that will be in the museum someday. I often like to talk about how the Wright brothers were a wonderful example of how individuals can make a difference. Here were two brothers who, largely on their own, invented the first airplane, and everything you see here in the museum stems from what they did. And they really changed the world.